controversial life story, and it's a shame that I'd have to say that my life, my very existence is controversial, but apparently it is. I was conceived in rape. I was conceived when my birth mother was abducted at knife point by a serial rapist. And she had actually gone to 2 illegal abortions, and I was almost aborted. She told me that if it had been legal, she would have aborted me. And so I literally owe my birth to the law being there to protect me. And I know that a lot of people think that my mother should have been able to legally abort me, which is like saying, if I had my way, you'd be dead right now. And that, of course, is very painful. I would never say anything like that to someone. And I've had some people say to me, well, I'm not saying I think your mother should have aborted you. I just think it should have been her choice. But her choice was to abort me. And I am alive because of pro-life advocates, voters, legislators who recognize that mine was a life worth saving. And I was protected before abortion became legal in the United States. Today, my birth mother and I are both thankful that we were both spared from the horror of abortion. I was actually adopted and raised in a Jewish family. They were secular Jews, even though they sent me to Hebrew school. Really, God was irrelevant in our household. And I learned my pro-life values from my atheist Jewish grandmother growing up. Both my grandparents were from Poland, in the south, in the area called Galicia. My grandfather had actually fought for Poland in World War I. And after my grandfather died, when I was about 14 years old, my grandmother began sharing the story how when she was pregnant with my aunt, who is the younger of her 2 children, that my grandfather had told her to go get an abortion. And she said, I never loved him again after that. And she'd say over and over again, how could they do that? How could they kill the babies? And I was horrified to consider this fact that my grandfather had wanted my aunt to be aborted, my aunt who I adored. And so I had to face the issue at a very young age. And so it really helped me to realize how wrong abortion was. But even still, I never considered it how it would apply to my life. I just figured I just won't have one. But then when I was 18, I got information from the courthouse. And that's when I first learned that I was conceived in rape. And I instantly felt targeted by society because I knew what people said about children conceived in rape, that this would be the reason for abortion. And I really felt like I was in a position where I would have to justify my own existence, that I would have to prove to people that I shouldn't have been aborted and that I was worthy of living. I called a local Right to Life office after looking in the phone book because I just wanted to speak to someone who valued my life. And the woman on the other end of the phone spoke words of value into my life when I was really hurting. Then I asked my adoptive parents how they feel about abortion and what about in cases of rape. And my adoptive father started to say, well, I've always felt like, who am I to say what a woman can or cannot do with her own body? I guess I'd have to say I've always been pro-choice. And I said to him, but Dad, you raised me 18 years. You watched me grow up. Like, you really believe that her body, her choice was more important than my whole life? Like, really, Dad? You really believe that? And it was like he instantly snapped out of it. And he said, no, I don't believe that. You know, how would I ever get to a point where I would believe such a thing? And he explained that as a professor at a liberal university that it was just expected that if you were progressive-minded, you would be pro-choice. But he had never stopped to consider the ramifications of that position, particularly as an adoptive father. I was still determined to meet my birth mother. I wanted to hear that maybe there was some mistake, that this was not how I was conceived. I didn't want to still feel like I was a target. I didn't want to be part of the classification conceived in rape. Who would? So I had a judge allow my caseworker to try to contact my birth mother and see if she wanted to meet me, and it worked. I was attending university out of state at the time, and I finally received a letter with my birth name, which was Judy Ann Miracle. So I was a miracle baby. I thought that was kind of cool. And it had her name, Joanne, with her phone number. And I called her up, and she said that she was sorry to hear that I already knew. And then she proceeded to fill me in on all of the horrific details. It was truly a worst case scenario. She was very, very petite, a single mom heading to the grocery store at night. And he jumped out of the bushes with a knife and abducted her. And she basically went on to describe for me in graphic detail how he brutally raped her. And that's how I was conceived. And that was so hard to hear. All these years I had dreamed so much of meeting her. She was absolutely precious to me. And so to think that she had been violated like this really pained me. I felt totally worthless because of people who would say that my life was like garbage, that I was disposable. And I had to realize that my biological father was a really bad man. She had gone to several police lineups and stopped going because she wouldn't recognize his face, but they knew that this was a serial rapist. And then she sent me a beautiful letter saying that it was not reason enough of having to give up something as beautiful as you were. She said, nothing as precious as a baby. And told me that I had always been in her heart, always been in her thoughts, and said that she didn't know how to express her inner feelings on the phone, but that it was so great, big, beautiful. It's always been my dream. I'm so happy I'm crying. And she wrote in closing, a love that ate at me for 19 years, my daughter at last. And that was all my dreams come true. And I felt so affirmed. But then weeks later, I got up the courage to ask her about abortion because I still needed to know. I wanted to feel safe. I didn't want to feel like this was an issue. And she told me that if it had been legal, she would have aborted me. And she said to me, you don't know what it was like. And I know that that's true. But I also know that today she's okay, she's doing great. She has a wonderful husband who she met just a few years after I was born, a beautiful home. And despite the pain of her saying that to me, I still chose to nurture a relationship with her, to honor her for the role that she did play in my life. And I just hope that if I could prove myself good enough, that she'd change her mind. I sort of felt like in the movie Forrest Gump, where there's this feather floating, and he talks about how sometimes in life you're just sort of floating like a feather haphazardly. And in a way, growing up, I felt like I was a puppet and there were marionettes and they were pulling strings on my life, and all these people making decisions that were life-changing. I mean, to take my very life when my birth mother tried to abort me, or being placed in the family I was placed in for adoption. And ultimately, I did find my identity in Christ, to know that He created me in His image, on purpose, for a purpose, and that He knit me together in my mother's womb, that He's my real father, my first father before anybody else knew I existed, and that He had special plans for my life. And then having this worldview also helped me to understand that good can come out of evil. Not that God intends evil, but that He can take what man intended for harm and use it for good. And that is the story of Joseph in Egypt, when his brothers sold him into slavery. And God ended up using all of that for good to save His people. And it is the story of our Savior. And again, it's not that God intends evil, but I really believe that He gives people free will, and love requires free will. He wants us to love Him and to be loved by Him, and He doesn't want us to be pre-programmed robots where we are forced to love Him, and we're forced into obedience and to never do anything wrong, because then that's not love. Growing up, I had wanted to be an attorney since I was about 10 years old. My dad recognized the tenacity I had to persist no matter what. And so he encouraged me to be an attorney from a very young age. I remember when I was in high school and I told people I wanted to be an attorney, and they would say to me, "Oh, like a feminist." And I thought, yeah, you know, like a feminist. I mean, I'm pro-woman. But then I started to hear that being a feminist meant that you were supposed to be for abortion. And that didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand how killing babies has anything to do with being pro-woman. They'll say, you know, if your mother hadn't been raped, you wouldn't be here either. You know, so does that mean you're pro-rape? And I explained I did exist, and my life would have been ended because I would have been killed through a brutal abortion. I may not look the same as I did when I was 4 years old or 4 days old, but that was undeniably me. And I would have been killed. It's a huge moral difference. And so I know that God does not intend the evil, but He can bring good out of evil. Today, I have a global pro-life organization made up of over 450 who were conceived in rape like me, or conceived in incest, or women who became pregnant by rape and are either raising their children, or they are birth mothers who chose adoption after being raped, or they miscarried and they get in touch with us because they want to be able to speak to someone who acknowledges their grief, who acknowledges their loss. So many of these women who miscarry after rape say everybody else says they should be happy. In our organization, we have many women who are post-abortive from rape, and they regret aborting. We've had so many women say that the abortion was worse than the rape, and that it was more violence brought upon them after having already been traumatized, that they had more difficulty overcoming the abortion than the rape. One woman recently wrote that I forgave my rapist long before I forgave myself. But people just assume that these women would be better off after an abortion, and that's not true. Studies show that they're 4 times more likely to die within the next year after the abortion. They have a higher murder rate because the abortion helps perpetuate an abusive situation. We know that child molesters and sex traffickers love abortion. They can't do what they do without the abortion clinics. It destroys the evidence and enables them to continue perpetrating. I had a story that was published recently from a woman from Costa Rica who became pregnant by rape at the same time as one of her best friends. They were both gang raped, and she ended up having her baby while her girlfriend had an abortion. And when her child was 10 months old, they got together and they went to a park. And the one who aborted kept looking at this child saying, you know, my baby would be 10 months old now, and my baby would have my eyes, or my baby would have my smile. And then she said to her friend, I just can't stop feeling like a murderer. A few months later, she went to visit this friend again, only to find that she had taken her own life. And her mother explained that she could not get over the abortion, that it was the abortion that really devastated her. And so I appreciate the fact that people are concerned for the welfare of rape victims. But again, the baby's not the scary enemy. According to the United States Supreme Court, rapists don't deserve the death penalty. And in a second case, they found that even for child molesters, it's cruel and unusual punishment to give them the death penalty. So how is it that the innocent child deserves the death penalty for his crime? And I tell people, punish rapists, not babies. I appreciate the fact that Poland has been pro-life for so many years, but there have been exceptions in the law for the last several decades. And those exceptions target and discriminate innocent people. And it is simply barbaric to punish an innocent child for someone else's crime. And then as far as children who have so-called fatal fetal abnormalities, you hear doctors often say that the child is incompatible with life. But how can you be incompatible with life when you're still living? And oftentimes these children who, they say that they have a fatal heart defect, it's really the doctors who have the fatal heart defect, because they target these children for extermination, and they think that this is a life not worth living. We have so many people from my organization, Save the One, not just who are, have rape-related stories, but also people who were given a challenging prenatal diagnosis and told to abort. And their children deserve to be protected. Just because the parents were pro-life and chose life, you know, what if they had been vulnerable? What if they had listened to the doctors? What if their values were different? It's not about the parents' choice, it's about the humanity of that child who doesn't deserve to be killed. I know that there are people in Poland who are upset that I'm here, who have expressed anger that I'm here sharing my story, and they really wish me dead. They talk about women's rights, but I remind them, I'm a woman. What good is my right to anything as a woman if I don't have my right to life? And I know that they can never answer that question, because all other rights are worthless if you don't have your right to life. They're not being pro-woman. Clearly they show that with the way that they treat someone like me. One person on Facebook said that it is rude to come to a place where you are not welcome. Well, first of all, just because he's not welcoming me doesn't mean I'm not welcome. I've met some wonderful people today already who have welcomed me. But I think of the irony of his statement, that I'm not welcome in life and that I don't deserve to be living. I mean, that's what they're telling me, that I should be dead, that I should have been killed. And that is not compassionate. And don't you dare use my birth mother to suggest that she needed this, that she needed a right to kill me. If you said that to her face today, she would tell you how wrong you are. On my birthday, a few years ago, she called to wish me happy birthday and to tell me that my grandmother had died on my birthday. I was born on her anniversary and she died on my birthday. My birth mother and I had both been to visit my grandmother just a few weeks before, and she wasn't looking up, she wasn't smiling. And not only did I get her to look up and to smile, but I got her to laugh because I sang to her, and if you heard me sing, you would laugh too. It's not good. But we had a long conversation and a wonderful heart-to-heart conversation. And as we were about to hang up, my birth mother stopped me and she said, Rebecca, Rebecca, I just want to say, I'm so glad I had you. That was the best birthday gift ever. 4 decades after she had sought to kill me. 2 decades after she had been telling me it should have been my right, she was able to say these words to me. When you protect women and children in your society from abortion, there will be women who can now say to their children, I'm so glad I had you, because of the protection that you offered.